Welcome back, everyone. Well, in this new season, we are trying to focus on form elements basically. Well, if you remember, I told you that 70% of the time we're usually trying to show some data to users, and sometimes we try to get some data from user. And in your lifetime, you have so many times opened a form and filled out something in that form, and finally you've saved or submitted the form, anything. And this is a form that we are trying to design in this season. And I told you that in a perfect world, usually UI UX designer gives us something to design. But in a perfect world, well, so many times it happens that you do not cooperate directly with UI UX designer, and sometimes, for example, a person gives you something in a piece of paper, or sometimes a picture like this, and this is actually a decent picture or decent image, and this is a form that we are going to design with HTML and CSS, and since a UI UX designer hasn't prepared this, we need to make it pretty ourselves. For example, this is just used a color black in this, no text shadow, nothing. We ourselves, developers, should make it pretty, and we will see how can we make it pretty soon. So let's start. And if you take a look at this, you can see that I have created a folder and I call it HTML forms. I can open this with VS Code and actually open this folder as well, and open this HTML file with a browser, first a Google Chrome. And as you can see, I have put the zoom on 175% so that you can see better. And this is the code that we are trying to start with, and you can see that the HTML template is ready here, and style.css is empty, but we have included in our file here, and this is where we are trying to start. So in order to design a form, if you remember the previous season, we just learned two input types. One one input type text, and the other one was input type password. But we have so many other input types, and we will see all of them. And in previous season, as you saw, we created a form element, or a form tag. It had a action and a method, but for now we just leave these action and method empty, because this is something that backend developer should tell us what to do. For example, you cooperate with backend developer and he tells you should put the method on get or post, or the action should be some URL he gives you, and for now we just leave it empty. And inside this form here, I'm going to create a div here, and for my div here, if you take a look at this, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, or if you consider a button as a division, we have 5 divisions. So in this here, I can create div class, and I call it form div, or stands for form division. And inside each form division, we have so many divs that each one is a form group class, and I call it form group. And this form group is for this first name and the input type, and another form group for this last name, and this is what I'm trying to do. So inside this, we have first of all a label, and we've covered all of these tags, labels, input type, text in previous season, and you remember what is label for. And inside this, we can create an input here and give it an ID. And the ID that I'm trying to give to this is the first name, actually, first name. And if you remember, we should not use, for example, this is the kebab case I told you about. We should use kebab case for these kind of for the ID or HTML classes like this, all of them. So this is the label for this input. We have linked these two tags using this for and ID, and inside this label we should just say first name. The user should input its first name, and if you take a look at the result for now and hit refresh, as you can see, this is the first name and this is the input inside that. But this input should go down to the next line, and this is something that we will fix. Don't worry about this. That would be working with CSS, but for now we are trying to get just prepared all those HTML elements, and we will use CSS to make them pretty soon. And get back to codes for now. And this is a form group, and there's something that I need to mention right now here. When we submit this form, when we actually click on this save button, some data should be sent to backend. For example, let's imagine that user has written X for first name and Y for last name, and for example Z for website or some data. But when this user submits this form and sends the data for backend, and we should have a name for all of these data. For example, we should say the first name is X, the last name is Y, the website is Z, right? So we should have a name for all of these inputs, and this is actually something that we have to do. And let's get back to our code. We can use something called name for this, but there's something about name attribute is that we should not use kebab case, we should use snake case in this. What is the difference? This is underline, and this is actually, let's here's something. This is kebab case. I'm not sure if they wrote kebab like kebab or kebab, but since I'm native, we actually pronounce that kebab, not kebab. It's something that English is. So this is kebab case and this is snake case. So I comment these two here so that you know about them in future, and this is something that you need to know in this session. So this would be our snake case, and this is actually camel case, and this is actually Pascal case. These types of writings is used for some word that you are not allowed to use a space. For example, here I'm not allowed to use a space, or here or here. So when you are not allowed to use a space, these are 4 different methods in order to write your text, and this is kebab case, snake case, camel case, and Pascal case. So for name attribute, for everything that we used here before, we used kebab case, but for name attribute you should use snake case. And why is that? Because when you submit these data for backend, in backend actually programming language like PHP, in PHP you should never use kebab case in PHP for your variables and things. And when this thing is submitted to backend, well, for the backend developer, they say that the first name, for example, let's type something in this here. When it's submitted to the backend, for example, I write here, for example, Ali. When this form is submitted for a backend, we save this and send this data for backend, it actually uses this name attribute. It says that the first name is Ali, the last name is. So this is why we should not use a kebab case for names. This is something that you need to have in mind. So this is it. This is one div, and we can hit Control Shift D. And in previous season we did set a shortcut for duplicating lines, Control Shift D, and this is, if you hit Control Shift D and you didn't duplicate, you can watch my previous season, because some people start from season 2, some season 3. This is something that I have to tell those people who start from season 2 or other things, that something that I do not mention. If from now on, if I didn't say anything or didn't cover anything, it's just because that I have already covered that. So this is something that you need to have in mind as well. So this is the first name that we use, and we can use actually first name and first name. So let's fix something else as well. I am going to use lowercase for all of these things here. and I can hold down Alt and double click on this, and Control Alt D, another shortcut that we did. Oh, it was Control Alt L. It was the lower for the lower case, and Control Alt D. Sorry. So I convert all of these to lowercase, and why did I do that? Because I want to hit Control D, Control D, Control D, and I convert it to the last name. That's why. But the problem is when I write it on lowercase here, refresh, and these will be at lowercase as well. But I can use CSS in future to capitalize or the words that I need here. So that's why we can use lowercase here, and we can use CSS in order to capitalize or transform to uppercase or things like that. And let's actually do that with CSS so that you can see it. We can actually do that as well. So this is my first name and this is my last name, and as you can see, they both are in the input type is text for both of them. But we also have other types of inputs. For example, for this birthday or phone, we have actually another thing called input type number. We can use that input type number for the income when user is trying to write something in US dollar. But for phone number, you may think that we should use input type number as well, but no. Because usually phone numbers start with 0, and it would cause some problems for input type number. We actually you need to use input type text for phone numbers. But for this birthday, input type text and number, this is we should use something called input type date. So let's use them and let's see how they are. Sorry, and let's actually duplicate this and duplicate this another time, and this is something that we need to do. Control D, and I call it phone number. But sorry, I actually selected this name is actually something important. This is name attributes. I shouldn't change that. So okay, the other thing is actually birthday. And if we come back here, hit refresh, for all of them input type is text, but for the other one, for this last one, we should use input type date. Let's save this, hit come back, hit refresh, and as you can see, this is the input type date that user can pick a date here. But for phone number, we actually need to use this numbers here, but there's something that we need to do for this phone number. Well, when we set the input type on text, well, if somebody opened this with a phone device, in the phone devices, keypad or something that the user wants to type on phone devices will be opened on this. But if we open it, set an attribute here and call the attribute is input mode, and the input mode we can set that on numeric, and this actually helps those phone devices to open a keyboard layout on something like this, so that they can put numbers in that. So this is it. So that's why we can actually use input mode numeric, and that would help. And so the input type is text for phone number, but with an exception that we use the input mode on numeric. And this is the input type date, and these are the 4 inputs that we wrote here, but we have so many other inputs that we need to cover in the next session. And there's something else that I want to tell you is that take a look at this input type date that we have used is well, any browser might treat this input type date differently, but usually we do not use this default input type from browsers. We usually use some plugins or some thing that other developers have created, for example a date picker, and we include that date picker in our project and we will use it, and we will see about those date pickers. But why we do not use this input type date, the default input type from browsers? Well, first of all, the customization of these input types is really hard, and we usually have a hard time customizing this. And second of all, they're beautiful. And imagine if we try to customize this input type, and basically the input type date from the browser sucks. So that's why we use the other plugins for input type date. For example, let's search a date picker, and the date picker that we use, for example, date picker for HTML CSS plugin. Okay, you can see there are so many different date pickers that we can use in our projects. And for example, this bootstrap date picker, this JavaScript date pickers, they all have some resources telling us, or documentation guiding us how can we actually use this date pickers in our project. So this is something that we will come back and fix in future. We will try to use a date picker, but for now, for this season, it's enough. For this one, it looks very similar to default date picker, but I bet the customizing this is pretty much easier. But this is enough for this session, and in this season we do not have a sum up section at the end of each video, but we do have a sum up section at the end of the session for the whole session. So this is it. Let's finish this session, and hope to see you in the next one.